Living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
Suicide deaths and attempts have reached epidemic proportions in Montana. In fact, in 2016, Montana topped the list for the highest rate of suicide in the nation. So why is Montana the epicenter of suicide, and why, for so many, is Montana becoming their last best place? I'm Janet Whitmoyer, and this is Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. Stay tuned. Welcome back. My first guest is Carl Roston, who is a suicide prevention coordinator with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Thank you.
Let's start off by talking about Montana being the highest in the nation for suicide, and actually we've ranked up there at the highest or near the highest for 4 decades. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what's going on in Montana that caused this?
Well, it's important to understand that this isn't a new issue. We've been in the top 5 for the last 40 years, but we've been high for 100 years. We've been in the top tier state for suicide for nearly 100 years. And it's not just Montana, it's our region. If you take a look at the top 10 states for suicide, it's pretty much right down the Rocky Mountain region. And there's a number of issues that play into that. Social isolation, substance abuse, specifically alcohol, access to lethal means, primarily firearms. We have huge stigma when it comes to mental health, especially depression, and that's probably one of the greatest ones. But we also have altitude. You know, the altitude is a correlation with suicide. So there are a number of factors that play in, and it's multiple factors occurring at the same time.
Okay. So are you seeing a certain age group where we're seeing a higher rate of suicide in the state?
The highest, and this is both nationally and in Montana, it's middle-aged white men. That 35 to 64 is the highest. In Montana, it's 35 to 44 is the highest in our state.
Wow. Nationwide, you talked a little bit earlier about the stigma of mental health. And nationwide, 90% of the people who die by suicide have been diagnosed with some type of mental illness. Can you talk about how mental illness plays into suicide in Montana?
Yes. In Montana, it's about 83% of those who died have a diagnosable mental health issue. Most prominent is depression. About 69% of the time it is depression, far exceeding any other diagnosis. The depression piece has a lot, many times it's a suffering that people go through for sometimes weeks, months, sometimes even years. And because of the stigma, they do it silently, because there's a lot of shame and guilt associated with it. And so many times people don't talk about it, they keep it silent and they suffer. And then when the pain exceeds the ability to cope, that's when we see a suicide attempt or a death by suicide.
Okay. And we're seeing a lot in the news lately about high school students and teens who are completing suicide. Can you talk about what's causing this to happen in Montana, where teens feel the need to complete suicide?
And I think it's important to understand Montana youth is about almost 3 times the rate of suicide for the same age group nationally. What we see some of the same factors as we talked about why Montana is high. Access to lethal means. You have kids are often impulsive. They do things without thinking. There's about 30% of youth suicides occur within an hour of the first thought. Wow. But there's other factors. We have a culture of kids coming up, and not just Montana, nationally also, that have limited or fewer and fewer skills to be able to deal with adversity, fewer coping skills, and that is a huge factor.
Okay. As a parent, how could I tell if my child might be at risk or contemplating suicide?
There's a couple things that we advocate for. One, and this is both a national recommendation, but also what we're recommending in Montana, is universal screening for depression starting at age 12. That 86% of parents who lost a child to suicide didn't even know their child was depressed. as parents, we lose our objectivity. It's hard for us to think about our child wanting to die. So working with your pediatrician or your schools to have a screening is the first piece. But then also awareness. Educate yourself about what are the warning signs of suicide, how do I intervene, what are the resources that are available in our community.
Okay. And I know there was also a TV show on Netflix called, I believe, The 13 Reasons Why. Can you explain to us a little bit about what that TV show is and what your perspective is on that show?
Sure. 13 Reasons Why is a very popular show on Netflix right now. It's because it follows an adolescent who's going through a number of social stressors and peer pressures and bullying and that type of stuff, and she becomes suicidal. The original intent of the show was to raise awareness. Unfortunately, it's had a kind of a negative effect. It glorifies and glamorizes suicide, which is one of the biggest factors that we see when we have what we call a suicide contagion or a spread of suicide. But also, it fails to connect the correlation between suicide and mental health. And so we have seen a number of kids that have actually increased suicidal thinking. And what we're really advocating, I think our first decision would be to tell parents not to allow their child to watch it. But the minute you do that, it makes them want to watch it. I think probably the better thing to do is to sit down and watch it with your child, and then process the information and use it as an opportunity to learn and have open communication with your child.
Okay, and kind of along that lines, there's another phenomenon, or maybe an internet show or challenge called the Blue Whale Challenge.
Yes.
Can you tell us just a little bit about what that is?
Sure. This was actually started in Russia, and is an internet challenge game, and there's 50 tasks, but each task desensitizes the person to death. And the 50th challenge is for them to take their own life. And this has been associated with a number of suicides in Russia and England, and has now come over to the United States. And we've had some as nearby, in some from our smaller schools in Montana, and definitely in other areas of the country.
Okay, and just real quickly, I have one more question. Some people might be afraid to bring up the issue of suicide with somebody. Is that something that we should shy away from, or is that something that really we should be talking to family members about?
We absolutely need to be talking about it. There's a myth out there that people are afraid to bring up the word suicide because they think it'll put the idea in the person's head. There's not 1 ounce of research to show that. You can do no harm by asking somebody if they're suicidal. And asking somebody if suicidal validates the person's pain, gives them an opportunity to talk, it opens up communication, it lowers impulsivity. It's the best thing that you can do.
Well, and we'll end on that great piece of advice, and thank you so much, Carl, for sharing your information with us.
Thank you.
We'll be back with our next guests who have faced suicide head on and have emerged stronger and with a message of hope. Stay tuned. With me now are Heather Ireland and her son, Dimitri. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Dimitri, I want to start with you. About a year ago, you attempted suicide. Can you tell us a little bit about what was going on with you during that time?
Yeah, I actually was struggling with a lot of anxiety and depression. And at the time, I had just been pulled out of public high school and was working on an online high school. And I just kind of felt alone and a little bit abandoned, was the general gist of it.
Okay. So were there signs that you think your friends or your family should have or could have seen in you that would have indicated that you were suicidal?
I stopped going out and I stopped doing things. I was pretty stagnant. I stayed in my room a lot. And I just, I wouldn't and couldn't do the things that I loved anymore.
Okay. Did you know, did any of your friends know how you were feeling at that time?
Well, I didn't. I guess you could say that people were aware that I was depressed because that was something that I'd been struggling with for a while. But the only time anyone knew that I was suicidal was when I sent a message to everyone before I attempted and told them that I was attempting. And one of them called the ambulance and they came and got me.
Okay. What would you do now if someone told you, one of your friends told you that they were feeling like they wanted to commit suicide?
If I could, I would try and be by them, because I feel like that's something that I could have used at the time. And I would have called the suicide hotline if I couldn't have reached them, maybe both if I thought it was severe enough.
Okay. And earlier you talked about having anxiety and some depression. What roles do you think that mental illness plays in suicide?
I mean, I feel like they go hand in hand, and I feel like that's not talked about a lot.
Okay.
Not to say that they are the only reason someone might be feeling that they need to commit suicide, but they're definitely large factors in, the want to end one's life.
Okay. And if there was one thing that could have been done to change your mind, was there any one thing?
I think because for me, it was a spur of the moment thing.
Okay.
If someone had just been there to ground me and tell me that it would be okay, it probably would never have happened.
Okay, so for you, being with people
Yeah.
is what you really needed. Do you feel like this would ever, you feel like the need to do that again, or do you have those
Not at
thoughts?
all. I mean, I have a very good environment now. I'm on meds that work perfectly for me. I'm doing counseling, going to the therapist, and I am keeping mindful of the things that do upset me and the things that do trigger me, and that helps me, in astronomical proportions. It's just wonderful.
So your life now is really good?
Yes.
And you're feeling like you're in a good place?
Definitely.
Okay. Heather, I wanted to turn to you. How are you feeling? Are you worried for Dimitri that he would ever fall back into that pattern?
Yeah, I don't think that I will ever not be concerned. I will always have that in the back of my mind as far as the fear of almost losing my son. I will always be concerned for him and his mental well-being.
Okay. And as a parent of a child who's gone through this, what advice would you have for other parents who might or might not even know that they have to face this in their life?
You know, I think the most important thing would be to listen to your child, even if they're not talking. Pay attention to things going around them. If they make a threat of suicide, don't just brush it off as teenage drama. Take it seriously, and get help for them and for you. Get professional help.
And also, I had asked Dimitri a little earlier about if there were signs he thought that you or his friends could have seen. Looking back on it, was there anything that you noticed or anything that you think you could have picked up on that might help somebody in the future?
You know, I think for me, the one lesson that I did learn was taking his depression seriously. I don't suffer from depression, and so I didn't understand it. And so when I was taking baby steps, I guess, as far as trying to help him, but I think I could have done more. I will say that when I got the call that he had attempted, I was shocked. I was along in a group of parents that would think that would never happen to me, but it does. You know, it does. So that's why I say listen to your child and pay attention to them. And
well, I'm certainly happy that we've had a really good outcome. And I know, Heather, that you are leading in East Helena a suicide prevention group. And just real quickly, can you tell us what you're doing in that?
Yeah. We started it in 2016. It was just a group of concerned citizens about the suicide rate in our community. And so we have been just doing community outreach and trying to provide education for parents for signs that they can look for in their teens.
Okay, great. Well, Heather and Dimitri, I want to thank you for coming and sharing a very personal story with us. It sounds like you have a really bright future ahead of you, Dimitri, and I'm pulling for you all the way. So thank you again, both of you, for coming. Up next, learn what's being done to help protect our teens. Joining me are Ron Whitmoyer, the Superintendent of East Helena Schools, and Jess Hegstrom, an AmeriCorps Vista Service member working with the school district and the East Helena community on suicide prevention activities. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining us. Thank you. Ron, let's start with you. I know that you are very passionate about suicide prevention in your community and school district of East Helena. Can you tell us a little bit about what's driving your passion?
Yeah, suicide to begin with anywhere is just unacceptable, but it really hit our East Helena community really hard recently. In the last 5 years, we've had 7 suicides of teenagers in the East Helena area, greater Helena area, but 5 of those kids were East Helena kids that I knew personally in many instances. So there's a small community, and it's so small that this number of suicides is just unacceptable whatsoever.
Okay. And so you knew you had a problem. What did
Right.
you do to turn that passion into action?
Well, it wasn't me. It was a whole group of people that looked at this and said, this is just totally unacceptable. A perfect illustration of just how unacceptable it was that we implemented something called the PACS Good Behavior Game. PACS Good Behavior Game is a suicide prevention program that doesn't look anything like suicide prevention. It's for kids, that it's a way of thinking for a lifetime, a way of regulating their behavior throughout the rest of their life. In fact, it's used at kindergarten and first grade, second grade pretty exclusively. But in East Helena, this was such a passion of all of my staff that we had training for this PACS Good Behavior Game, and all of my teachers voluntarily showed up for a whole day training of this after the school year was over. So the passion runs deep, not only with me, but the people that I work with. It just totally unacceptable. We've done several other things as well. We've implemented a screener in the middle school for the most part. It does trickle down into the 5th and 4th grades intermittently. But we've done a screener to give us signs of ways we might identify kids that are at risk for these mental health issues that they're challenged by. What we do is we've implemented something called SOS, Signs of Suicide. We've helped our middle school kids learn about suicide, and our counselor teaches that so that the kids are emotionally ready for it, and he can be the best judge of how the kids are reacting to the information that they're learning. And so we've done that as well. We've also done these screeners, like I said, that talk about kids that are intrinsic people and extrinsic, so that they can understand the difference of how kids deal with different issues.
Okay. And also you brought in a very special person in Jess. You want to tell us a little bit about her?
Sure. Jess was one of our ideas that we needed help. We needed somebody to champion the suicide prevention for us in East Helena. And so we applied for an AmeriCorps Vista, and we were lucky enough to get Jess Hegstrom to come and work with us. And Jess is our AmeriCorps Vista member.
Okay. So Jess, what made you want to come to East Helena and work on this project?
Well, so my path to AmeriCorps and East Helena was not a direct one. I used to be a journalist and for about 10 years. And then when I left the industry, I moved to Missoula and wasn't quite sure what to do with myself. And I have a lot of passion and drive. And so I decided to join AmeriCorps, and I thought that I would go into food insecurity, but then I learned about this position. My dad had completed suicide when I was 20 years old, and I felt like this is something I need to address. And so I came to East Helena, and since then I've fallen in love with it.
Oh, awesome. Well, we're glad you're here. So in addition to working with Ron in the school district, I also know that you're involved in the East Helena community. Can you tell us a little bit more about the activities that you're involved with in the East Helena community?
Absolutely. So I work a lot with the East Helena Suicide Prevention and Awareness Coalition. It's been going for about a year, and I've been working with them since probably February. So working with them on the Out of the Darkness campus walk, trying to put on education events and outreach for the community, because awareness is a very important part of this conversation. Passing out gun walks as often as I possibly can to deal with the lethal means issue. And then we're also working on putting on an event called the Suicide Survivor Lost Day. That's on November 18th. We're about to gear up for the next Out of the Darkness walk, so start planning for that. And then just any way that we can possibly educate the community, make them more aware, and have people work together and talk about this issue, because I think the best way to deal with it is through a grassroots effort where everyone helps each other.
Awesome. So, and I also hear that you have been so successful and enjoyed this that potentially we might get you in the community for another year. Is that true?
That is true.
So what would that involve? Is it another application, or?
It's another application, and then I pretty much continue on, and I really love East Helena. I hope that I get to stay here on a much more permanent basis.
Oh, awesome. Well, we hope you do too. And I'd like to thank both of you for coming in and sharing what you're doing in the East Helena community. It's making an impact and hopefully going far beyond the reaches of the community itself. So thank you both. There is no single cause to suicide, but its impact is far-reaching. Please, if you or someone you know is considering suicide, there is help. You are important. I want to thank our guests today, and until next week, stay fit, stay well, stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the YouTube icon. Special thanks to Fire Tower Coffee House and Roasters. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.